Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 3 of the Growth Cure podcast. Today, I've got Kenny Kline with me, who many of you may already know. Kenny is a serial entrepreneur, SEO, and digital marketing expert, and has most recently been working with Pillar 4 Media and most notably was the co-founder of BarBend back in 2016, a strength sports media company, which reached over 30 million annual users before it was acquired by Pillar 4 Media. Kenny, thanks a lot for taking time out for the podcast and being here today.
Thank you, my man. It's great to see you. Thanks for having me on.
We've known each other for a while, and I knew a bit about your backstory, but it was always really important. I think when we launched this podcast, I thought to try and get somebody like yourself on because of the experience you've got, especially in this industry as well. For the benefit of people that perhaps don't know enough about yourself, maybe just going back to 2016, way back in the Jack Media times. How did you end up? Because I know obviously you were originally at Jack Media, but how did you end up in this niche media space?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, why niche? I think perhaps even before that is where I got my interest, where I was first job out of college, I was a quant at a bank. So I was doing a lot of programming, more statistical stuff out of San Francisco. And in San Francisco, those days and these days, everyone's making an app. So I was like, oh, I want to make an app. My sister was a dietitian and she bought these flashcards that were terrible to study for her certification exam. Terrible, I mean, there was like all these typos, and she paid like $100 for them, or something like that. But there's not that many dietitians that get certified every year. I want to say there's like 3,000 a year or something, very, very small. So I was like, all right, I want to learn this app stuff. I developed an app for her to study and put it for sale for $30 or something on the App Store. And the first year, like I want to say like 80% of the dietitians bought my app because it was so good. And I was like, which is a pretty good, do a little math. It's like a
Yeah.
decent bit of money. At the time, I was like, oh my gosh, this is incredible, right? I saw that opportunity where if you serve like even a very small audience and serve them really well, it can be a solid business model. So I think, I took that further. A lot of other people have taken that really far in terms of their business models. And so when I started sites, SEO, then naturally, I think it made sense to kind of target those, especially if you're monetizing via affiliate. You want to know your audience and understand them really well and recommend and deliver things that they really are excited about. And that makes for a good business model. So ultimately, that's how I started looking at niches and just kept going down that path.
Okay, but it's interesting because yeah, nutritionists, I guess it's an audience that's passionate about what they do. You can create content or you can create a product around that. I guess going from that, so I can kind of see the connection because of I guess the healthcare, the health space. What then sparked the idea going from there to Barbend? I imagine there was probably you did quite a few things. I
Mm-hmm.
saw another podcast where there was some kind of a skincare or a rash
Yeah.
example, but I believe you may have tried a few different things. How did you
Mm-hmm.
then land up specifically with Barbend? And once you were there, what made you confident that, right, this is the one, this is a really good space?
Yeah, I think before Barbend, we had started a number of different sites in niches, and some of those were already doing well. What really prompted Barbend, the creation of it, was two things. One, probably the most important one, we brought on my partner, David Tao, who worked in some CrossFit gyms, was very active in health and wellness media before. So he understood the audience of Barbend very well. So really, Barbend was his idea in terms of like who we could serve and how we could serve them really well with our content. The other part of it was this moment a long time ago now. This is a lot more common and understood, but it was kind of like I had these very specific sites, like a mattress review site where you're just reviewing mattresses and that's it. And it's tough to create like a brand and probably impossible to have an ongoing audience because people buy their mattress and then they don't want to hear
That's
from you anymore until they buy their next one 5 years later, 10 years later, whatever. And so what we were trying to think about is like, all right, how can we do kind of this review content, but also have ongoing content and develop a relationship with these audiences and have what I called like an authority site, meaning you're like topically an authority in that space. And so that's where we wanted to do a site like that. We looked at a number of different areas to do that in. And because David came in, we're like, all right, we think we can really do well with this one. And BarBend's interesting because there's equipment, there's programs, there's supplements, there's all these different areas that you can recommend and monetize, but also there's a lot of, workout content and news and all this stuff that people really care about, that we can write about as well and develop more of a relationship with the audience that's ongoing. So those two things together is how we came up with BarBend's. It was really confirmed within the first month. David started probably 80% of all of the initial
Oh,
content,
right,
a lot
okay.
of it
Yeah.
news. And it was so well received because nobody was covering it as quickly, as professionally, as enthusiastically as he was. And so a lot of the content got picked up, and we went from, I want to say we were at like two or 300,000 visitors a month in the first 3 months, just from that, not SEO, just like, you know, Facebook groups and Google News, and Discover wasn't much of a thing then, but maybe it was just starting. We get mentioned in email things, and so all that stuff. So we felt like we'd really hit a good audience in a way that wanted our content, and then kind of built everything around that.
Yeah, makes sense. And I think what's interesting, the fact that David came into it, as you said, he really understood the audience. We'll probably go into that a bit later as
Mm-hmm.
well. But I think I remember even he used to be, if I remember right, sometimes even David was in the content. And I think I remember showing people Barbend way back. And one thing they
Mm-hmm.
really liked was because they were in the fitness space, they really appreciated the kind of the photographs showing proper form
Mm-hmm.
with lifting, things like that. And especially you've got that credibility, you've got people on the team that really understand the content, they know what they're talking about. That will
Mm-hmm.
come through. So I guess that was like the big piece of the puzzle at the start.
It was David and the folks that came on to write for us as employees or freelancers were just absolute experts and enthusiasts, and that helped separate us in the early days a lot too, both in terms of the training, the quality of the content, but also connections, also perspective, where it's like, what do people want to know in this space? I'm at this event. What are people talking about? All this stuff that bigger organization like your Men's Health, they might cover the CrossFit Games
Yeah.
that week, and the rest of the year they might not talk about it at all or very little, right? So we kind of cover that all year, or bodybuilding or Olympic weightlifting. Really few were covering them in depth, and we kind of brought like a, I don't know if big media is the word, but like a little bit more of
Yeah.
a system to it.
Definitely kind of catering to, yeah, all the different interests, like you said, even maybe even powerlifting, I think being one of the categories. And you touched on the strategy you were using at the beginning. I think you touched on maybe social media being one of those, that
Mm-hmm.
maybe in the early days, that's something you do have to do. At what point, because I know obviously later on that's where the kind of content marketing, organic search, SEO came into it kind of more heavily. What was the point at which, or what was like that aha moment where you kind of thought, right, SEO, this is really the way to go for this, and we want to dig into this further? Or was it just from the start, it was always like that?
Yeah, SEO was always a huge part of our plan just because we understood SEO. How we almost viewed the rest was like a link building engine, where when you're doing news and you're doing even training content, it's really not a great business model. You can maybe make it a little profitable through ads and through some occasional other sponsorship, but it's, as we've seen in a lot of media companies, it's really tough to scale. So we were saying, affiliate's probably the best way to monetize, especially at the time. But how do we develop a real brand and attract a lot of links and all that stuff? And so we kind of viewed it as a two-tier process where we're doing all of this work as like I called it a profitable link engine, where news is profitable, but it's not the business model. It's like if you break news, the amount of links you get is incredible. If you write great training content over time, that can rank, and then you'll get a lot of links for that. So it's kind of these combined perspectives is what we did. So SEO was always in the game, and all of this, our main game, and all of this other stuff was to service SEO and create a moat from everybody else that maybe wasn't doing a lot of that type of different content.
with the amount you invested into SEO. We know now, obviously, fast forward the amount of visitors that you gained and how much the audience grew as well. What would you say was the core SEO or content decisions that fueled that growth that came
I
later?
think the two things that I really valued back then and that I still value, one would be building a brand, like a true brand. That just has so many benefits to it these days in SEO where people and like a perceived brand where it's like you can have a brand, but how is Google viewing that brand? Branded search and different metrics that you might see, social sharing, that type of thing. So I wanted like a real authentic brand because that was something I always coveted in mattress reviews and more like reviews focused sites is like it's really you can build a brand, but it's just a much smaller type of brand in a lot of those metrics, right? And there's really not a lot of upside to build around that. And then building links in a really authentic way. And so we did a lot of content that we thought would generate natural links. And that
Mm,
ultimately is why we did the news and we did the training content and all that stuff. Opinion pieces that ended up doing really well were some of our early link magnets where people were just like, oh, no one, Nick English was one of our writers. He did a piece on
mm.
how astronauts weight train. Um,
Okay, that's quite a
and
unique
prepare for
piece. Then.
space, right? And it's like no one had, to my knowledge, written about that. And he just had the idea and he did it and attracted all this interest. All the metrics that SEOs look at are correct. And I think some SEOs look at how can we manufacture those? And we were like, how can we build processes that generate these things naturally? And generating it naturally like takes longer, but I always felt it was a protection. And I got hit with a penalty early on in 2012 at the Penguin, and so I wanted as natural as possible. Just I view that as a protection. In that, if you're doing that, it's not impossible, but it's, I think less likely that Google punishes you in some of these algorithm updates. So I feel like
Yeah.
those two things we got right, and those are really long-term views that were responsible for the success of BarBend. And they take a while to accumulate, but ultimately, I'll credit those things with some of our success.
As you said, it's longevity, not trying to, I guess, game the system. As some people think SEO is about. It's going to be more long-term thinking. It might take time, but you'll see the benefit later. I think specifically then knowing, your experience in this space, what would you say the biggest mistakes you saw? And you may have seen this over the years, maybe as you were building Barbend, or maybe this is something you've seen brands in the health space or the fitness space made mistakes when it came to SEO and content.
That's it's a tough question because it's sometimes things work for a while and then they don't work and then they work
Yeah,
again. And so, what's a mistake and what's a mistake today may not be a mistake tomorrow or, and vice
true.
versa. Especially in health and wellness, I think a lot of the shifts in the algorithm are magnified in that space, just being YMYL and being topics that are more sensitive
Mm,
to people's well-being. So that's which makes sense to me in some ways. I think the biggest thing that rarely works long term is going really broad in health and wellness, especially. Sometimes I've seen many sites, big sites, small sites, you have some success and they're let's throw everything out there and just like everything ranks for a while. And for sometimes Google smiles upon you and they just keep going and going and going. And always that, I think always, I'm trying to think of an example where that's not the case, but where it pulls back and it doesn't, and suddenly you're kind of stuck and you have all this content and it's tough to recover once you've done that because you've lost some of that trust and authority by going too broad and maybe stepping outside of your perceived expertise or real expertise. I think the other thing, and this is another tough one, but really investing in the content.
mm,
Sometimes people will just rank or, write kind of shorter things. And I think ultimately, if you do something really well, it takes, it may take longer to be successful, but ultimately, I think that's the right way to do it. And there's more protection in that. Doesn't mean you're protected necessarily. And even with BarBend's, what does it mean to be a great article? I think shifted over many years in
true.
Google's eyes, right? So it's like it's not to say we weren't trying to do great things, but it's like back in 2016, like first person content was really big. And then you got your medic update where it's like, oh, first person content, that's not health and wellness content. You want to be unbiased. And now it's shifted back to more personal testing and experience on some things, but not all things. And so it's not to say that those are mistakes by other brands necessarily, but you kind of have to shift to meet people and the algorithms and everything where they are over time.
It makes sense because, as you said, you're moving with the trends, moving with the audience. There was another episode we did with Andy where not so much on building a website, but just in terms of developing a product in the protein and supplement space.
Right.
They know trends are changing. I mean, they're already looking at things like they want to make certain protein bars, but they know that there's a
Mhm.
problem with taste
Right.
and texture in this kind of space because they know that trends are changing, people's preferences are changing, and
Mhm.
they could potentially sell to a bigger audience now with content taste changes or
Mhm.
people's preferences change. You did touch on content. That's an interesting area because I know with BarBend, a key part of it was content, just the quality of the content. And because of that quality, that enabled you to build that topical authority. Do you have any tips? And I say this just because I know you had a big team, scaling up a content team and the challenges that come with building a content team, because it's
Mhm.
obviously, quite a creative role. Interested to know more about that and how you navigated those challenges or any tips for other brands.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, I built content teams a number of times, so a lot of different challenges, and some of them, especially in retrospect, are my own challenges. Doing it for the first time, you do it in a way that maybe I wouldn't do again. Um, I think a big thing is writers are very creative people generally, are passionate about their work, and so there are a lot of pros to that where they'll create these wonderful articles and work really hard and do great research and put it out there in the world. There can be cons to it. Hey, I want you to write the review, the 50th review of the 50th mattress. They might be a little bothered by that, as would a lot of people. They get bored or whatever. And so it's like, did you sign up for this? For that mattress site, a little easier because they knew what they were signing up for. I think for
Yeah.
BarBend, it's like, hey, I want to write about all this stuff. And it's like, cool, I need you to review, 20 weightlifting belts or something and 20 blenders for protein shakes. And so I think just understanding that these writers are human beings and putting balance in what we do. Whereas as an entrepreneur, you sit there with and a content planner, you might sit there with a spreadsheet and be like, cool, I do want these 20 weight builds reviewed like right now. But maybe you spread it out and you do one a week and then they do some news, they do some training content, stuff like that. Writers generally understand that there'll always be an element of writing stuff they don't want to write
That's true. Yeah.
as part of any job, right? I think the other interesting part is progression. You have these people that are really talented and they want to progress in their careers, as we all do. And so, what does that look like and how does that make sense? If someone's worked for you for 4 years, how can you have their role develop and have their career develop? How can they be compensated more? How can they earn more money for the company? All those things. And that's a tough one to figure out. Some great writers don't naturally translate to being great editors, which is like a higher level role. And it's like, if you're a great writer, it's like, man, I want you to keep writing, like let's find someone else to edit her. But editors kind of next on the food chain. So everybody wants to be an editor. And then an editor is really a lot of people management more than the word stuff. And so I've had a lot of discussions over the years and thinking through like, all right, what does that look like for a career perspective for these people? And some people are great at it and they transition. I think a lot of writers do miss writing. I've had some editors be like, oh, maybe I can still write one a week or something just to like, because they love
Mm.
writing, right? But some people transition to that editor role and it just doesn't suit them as well as the writing did. So um, I think the other part is, working um, in a company and all the normal issues that come with the company or a writing team is not
Yeah.
immune to it. So that's probably the number one thing that the challenge happening with content teams it's a bunch of people and all the normal people things, no matter content or whatever people are doing, figuring that out. And especially as I was relatively young entrepreneur doing it for the first time at some points and then doing it again. And you start with 3 people and then you've got 10 and then you've got 20 and then you've got 30 and then manage more later on. It's new skills that I have to develop and learn, and
Yeah.
I didn't always develop and learn them in time to deploy them for when I needed them. So over time, those challenges happen as well.
And and sometimes you just have to, as you said, learn as you go as well. You make decisions sometimes you might not get it right every single time, but I think yeah, as long as you're learning from them, and as you said, not just the challenge with content teams, that's with any sort of team. Maybe back to the SEO side of things. And
Mhm.
again, I'm biased as a link building person. I'm gonna talk about this as well. Part of it obviously was content, having the right audience, having brand. Those were all really important. And you did touch on it a bit in terms of link building. Was there any kind of I guess I say standout link building strategies or digital PR. You touched on social media being part of it as well. What was like the overall approach to link building, and what do you think made the difference?
I think at the beginning, it was definitely news and training content that led the way for link acquisition. Particularly news was a little outsized in its rewards, particularly
Yeah,
once we had a little bit of built-in distribution. Just even we call it breaking news, which if you do break some news, that's incredible for link
yeah,
acquisition. But even if it's like event coverage, being first by 20 minutes matters a lot, or it can matter a lot sometimes.
yeah,
So particularly for big company, like World's Strongest Man is one of the big competitions of the year, or the Olympia. Those are the two, like, in our world, the biggest with the most eyeballs on it. So we always wanted to publish first. Even for those big ones, it might be by 5 minutes if we can, or 10 minutes before someone else publishes. But the benefit being some other folks that publish an hour or two later, they link to us and go, oh, here are the results. Here's an
yeah,
original quote that somebody said to us, they link to us. And then everyone that kind of piles on it. So you can really get some amazing links doing that type of work. Over the years, we tried many things. I think a lot of the social stuff, YouTube stuff, can translate to links. We did some content creation with some outreach. So like Fittest Cities, I think you worked with us on that,
yeah,
where it's kind of like, hey, let's look. It's kind of like a data study, which became very popular.
yeah.
2018 to 2021, that's all people were talking about. Tough to pull off, but we did it for Fittest Cities in the US and did a lot of outreach around that, and had a lot of success around that content. I think for BarBend, that's what really stood out and had a lot of success with it, was
Yeah.
those campaigns that were natural but also like really caught fire. Fittest Cities is a useful one that we had seen people do in the security space, safest cities in the
Okay.
US. And it's great because we did, I forget what the number was, top 200 cities in like Alabama,
Yeah.
like where are the fittest ones. And if you're some small town in Alabama, there is like a local newspaper, but they probably don't have a lot to write about, right? In this small town. So if someone mentions them, it's like, hey, we're the 75th fittest city in Alabama or whatever, they'll write an article about it and we get a link. And so you do that enough times, it actually translates into a pretty successful campaign. So I think things like that were, outside of the news and the training content, our most successful link building campaign.
Again, going back to the importance of content, you can be building links, trying to do digital PR, but you need to have the right content behind it or the right content strategy and aiming at the right audience. I guess that
Mm.
was also a key part to it. Mm.
Yeah, very successful. And then, of course, once things rank, if it's the right thing, that can generate a lot of links on itself, or a lot of the tools and a lot of the leaderboards are a good one for events. All that stuff is a kind of set it and forget it link building campaign in a way. Once you have enough authority to rank and do that.
And the next thing I want to go into is, and a lot of people might be familiar with this, you were trying to balance, it was editorial content, but you have to monetize as well at the same time because it's like affiliate. I guess anybody that's doing kind of affiliate SEO, what would be the advice that you would give to others that are trying to build, like they have content that's kind of commercial, but they still need it to rank well? And we know obviously affiliate content sites, perhaps that didn't have a brand, haven't really done too well in recent years.
Whether it's mattresses or weightlifting equipment or even supplements, I think getting it and testing it yourself is really important, or having someone on your team that knows what they're doing testing it. Now there's updates that kind of address that more directly. But particularly with the rise of AI assisted content, AI written content, if you're doing commercial content, ultimately you want to add value to the reader. And if you haven't tried the product, how do you add value? There might be some cases where you can, but that was our way. Put it on video, test it, compare it against all the others. Even in an area where it's tough to have expertise, like mattresses, you can't hire like a mattress expert. So it's really hard to find a
Yeah.
writer that's a mattress expert, right? I never found one available to hire, but once you go and test, I don't know how many I've tested, 400 mattresses or something in my day. You know a lot about mattresses, and you go to the
Yes.
factories and you cut them open and you ask other people. You can become an expert in something over time and add a lot of value that way too. So ultimately, that's the most important thing. I think that's important for ranking. It's important for conversion. If you're recommending something, you get a higher conversion rate if you tell them, offer some value why they should buy this or not buy this. And ultimately comparisons, like where does it sit in the market? Why this mattress versus all the others? Even if it's a subtle thing, everyone needs that assistance if they're coming to your site. That's what I would recommend. And then two, take that process really seriously and really sit in the seat of the reader and be like, what do they actually want out of this article? You can look at it from an SEO perspective, and that is informative, right? Because people are Googling this stuff. But what is it that someone really wants? Like, what do they know already? What are they looking to find out? How are they prioritizing all this stuff? How can you help them navigate that page? How you lay it out is really, really important once you have that info. Those two things, I think, for commercial content are really important for standing out, for having success, and having longevity in the space.
And it goes back to this very nuanced approach to content, knowing your audience, knowing what the pain points are, or whatever it is you're covering in your content. That kind of leads me to another area where, again, this also affects content is AI generated content. We can't really ignore AI now because it's everywhere. What's your own personal take on AI content or the role of AI now, especially in relation to now that we are post the helpful content update?
There's few experts in AI these days because it's so new and moving so
It's
fast.
always
But
changing as well. Yeah.
yeah, so I think ultimately my perspective on it is that AI is moving very fast and it's going to continue to move very fast and get better and better and better. And so I think a lot of people, when they talk about it in SEO and content generation, talk about what's working today, which is useful for some discussions. But
Mm.
ultimately, I think about what's going to work in 3, 4, 5 years or beyond that. And I think Google ultimately and other platforms like that are thinking about the same thing. They're trying to have a longer term view on it and get it right over the longer term. Whether they have it perfectly right now or still adjusting, I mean, they're always adjusting. So I wouldn't say it's at a perfect state at the moment, but when would it ever be in a perfect state? The core thing I think about is if AI can just generate your content, then why would a place like Google even send someone to your site in the long run? They're still doing that, of
Yeah.
course, but we're seeing more snippets and all this stuff. So, um, the goal then for content creators is, and you can use AI to help you, but your perspective is the most important part, your human perspective. And so you need to bring some differentiation from that perspective. It's like it's either who you are, and thus your opinion matters, and that's a known entity. So, which we've seen with like authorship growing more and more and more. So it's not just like even if you're saying the same thing as AI, but you have an authority, then it makes sense that people
Mm.
would want to listen to you instead of AI. Or if you're saying something that AI can't credibly say. So if we're talking about commercial content, again, it's like, AI can spit out a mattress review. Would you believe them? And to me, that wouldn't be valuable or credible because AI can't test a mattress, not yet anyway.
Not quite there yet.
We're not there, yeah. Maybe one day. So I think it takes more work, but to create content like that and to have authority like that. But I think that's where content creators will go. And I think they will continue to thrive if they do that because we, as consumers, value those things a lot more and will value them more and more and more. But certain types of content, maybe not as much. Maybe we won't mind getting that content from AI.
Yeah.
And that proves to be the case in some ways already.
Yeah, makes sense because again, things are changing so fast. There's uncertainty about AI. The other thing that I wanted to again get your thoughts on was the role that AI is going to have on search itself. And do you think consumer trends will change when it comes to searching, especially in relation to health and wellness? A lot of people are talking about the role that brand plays, and I think that touches on a bit of what you already said in terms of people should be going back to a brand because they recognize them through the content. It's almost like the content moat thing. I'm just interested to know AI, how's it going to affect search? Do you think links will become less important? Do you think people will stop using Google and they'll go on to an AI tool to search?
The question of the day, right? And I think a lot of it depends on your timeline. If you're like, what's going to happen in 50 years from now? Be like, yeah, look, it probably looks pretty different in a lot of ways. If you're talking 5 years from now, maybe some differences, but I think with something as impactful as AI, it's hard to predict. I always love to cite AOL. AOL
Mm,
still has something like 2 million dial-up subscribers paying like $12 a month. Still a pretty solid
okay.
business. And people only unsubscribe when they die. Who's used AOL dial-up, in 25 years? Like only these, it's a lot older people, right? But there is a momentum to these core business models, and I think Google falls in that category. Googling it is a verb, and I think that I don't see in 5 years Google going away in any way, shape, or form in the traditional search sense. They may
Mm,
continue to add to it as they've done, but I think on that time horizon, it's still going to be an important thing, and people are going to just use it that way because people are used to doing it
yeah.
and they like it and it works pretty. There may be, and again, maybe it comes down to those types of content where some of us will use more like chat-based things or voice-based things to get information, especially basic information. If I want to review, again, I wouldn't want to hear it from AI. If I wanted to know the dimensions of a mattress, I could ask AI and I'd be confident what's a queen size
Yeah.
mattress. I'd probably trust what they would tell me. And old school SEO, it's like you write all those terms and that's an important page for traffic or whatever, because a lot of people search it. So there will be some shifts, but I think in a 5 year time frame, we'll see how this ages, but I don't see anything dramatic happening to the core search
Mm.
model in terms of important categories, important searches. Beyond that, who knows? There'll be an AI acceleration and there's all sorts of things that can happen, but I wouldn't bet on search going away in a shorter, relatively short time frame.
I'd probably agree, and I know there was a lot of talk about certainly maybe in some industries, let's say in marketing as well, people are heavily using AI tools to run certain searches. They just rely on LLMs. Like you said, I just can't see the masses moving away from just Googling because it's in people's vocabulary, it's just natural, it's the way people search. Perhaps people that are watching that are running something in the healthcare space, health and wellness, where do you think now they should be focusing their energy? Maybe ties in with yourself when you were building BarBend. We've talked about a lot of things, content, links, brand building, but where do you think ultimately people should be focusing first if they're kind of thinking, right, I want to get my SEO strategy ramped up? Perhaps they're doing a bit of SEO, but what do you think are the key things they need to be looking at?
It depends on how focused you are already. If you're a product company, for instance, you're going to write pretty near that product. Ultimately, two things I would say. Like one, look for areas you can add unique value. So what people haven't written about, or can you format it better, or can you cover it from a perspective that's new? And two, do always do testing. Write some of the content that you think is relevant and see how it performs and see what you can do and kind of always double down and iterate through that process where Google is a fickle mistress. And so you never know what's going to work. So it's always like test it and what does work, like double down on that, I would say.
And again, key point, in terms of knowing your audience, because then that's ultimately going to drive everything going forward. But as you said, you might have to test that. You might have to just try writing the content, or try different content formats, and then see what sticks. One of my last questions I was going to have for someone maybe that's watching, perhaps they're trying to grow a niche content brand, or SEO is just a major focus of theirs right now. What's something that's like people tend not to understand, or is like a common mistake that they'll make? What would you say is like the next thing they should be looking at?
But really, the brand is the big factor. And I think a common mistake I see is an authority is related to brand, of course, or like authorship. So a big difference between someone being an expert and Google perceiving someone as an expert. And that can go both ways, right? A lot of people, it's like, hey, I am a doctor. I'm writing about this stuff.
Yeah.
It's like, well, Google doesn't know anything about you. You don't do any of the stuff you have to do on social media or in public or whatever, right? So while you may be an expert, Google doesn't know that or it has no way to confirm. And so I think when people think about having a brand or having an author with authority, it's really about, of course, you do want them to be experts, right? That is valuable, but to be perceived as an expert is not always the same as being an expert. So I think that's a big thing that people don't think enough about when they choose their authors or when they choose their brands to work with. So that's an important factor as well.
Definitely, and I think everybody is talking about is building a brand. What does it actually mean? Because sometimes there's a lot of these kind of buzzwords going around, but it's a good reminder, as you said, you kind of have to steer Google in the right way, but obviously in a sustainable, natural way as well. Kenny, that was everything I had for you today. Again, appreciate your time. Great interview. We could probably talk for hours. Thanks a lot for taking the time out.
Thank you. Yeah, it was fun.